So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto X Devil May Cry X Harem. So let's start the series. Rain fell on a dimly lit, dark tower with the full moon shining brightly above it and the sounds of battle echoing from above. Lightning struck the air surrounding the tower, illuminating dark figures sitting on the roof with their glow. As the storm raged, lightning continued to clash, much like the two warriors who fought on its roof. Voice: have you heard about it? My father used to tell me stories about the Dark Knight Sparta when I was a child. The two warriors, both dressed in black with silver hair, twirled their blades around their bodies. One held a long katana, a black vest, and two more shorter swords, one black and one white, sheathed at the small of his back. The other wielded a huge broad sword, a black trench coat, bandages around his lower face, and two handguns holstered at the small of his own back. As they slashed at each other, raindrops caught on their blades, echoing through the tower's many halls. Voice: a demon's heart was awakened to justice long ago in antiquity, and he rebelled against his own kind for the benefit of humanity. He used his sword to close the portal to the demonic realm and keep the evil forces out of our human world, but because he was a demon, his power was also captured on the opposite side. The man with the broadsword hurried toward his adversary, dragging his blade across the ground with sparks flying from it as he did so. His adversary slashed at him, but he had to raise his blade to avoid it. The man with the single-edged blade was the only one with it still in its sheath, and he swiftly drew his guns and fired at him quickly. The other man smirked to himself as he spun his swords to stop the bullets, then slashed his blade and flung them all back at the man in the coat. The other man growled ominously and raised his blade before slashing the bullets, slicing them in half as they struck the statue behind him. Voice: then, decades later, his son, who is half human and half demon, decided to continue his father's job and defend the earth from the hordes of demons, including his own twin brother. Many people have not heard of or believe in the old legends. The two lunged at each other, their swords flashing like brilliant lights as they clashed, cutting even the rain around them. Until a third, much larger sword appeared and knocked the two away from each other. The blades finally came together and scratched, the heat from the collision making the blades glow even as the rain fell on the two, slicking down both of their hair in the same style. Voice: I too didn't believe it, assuming it was merely a kid's fairy tale. However, I later learned that this supposed legend wasn't a myth after all, and that Sparta actually existed. The boy with the third sword had flaming red, spiky hair and blue eyes that glared at the two people in front of him as he lunged at the man with the broadsword. He spun on one heel and attempted to slice the man, but the man blocked the attack with his own blade. The man in the vest then smirked as he ran forward and flipped up, swinging his sword down. The man with the broadsword gritted his teeth and spun on his own heel, knocking the red head off his sword and blocking the other sword before kicking him in the gut and crouching back into a position. Voice: how can I be certain? Well, I got to meet Sparta's sons, or rather, his grandsons. The teen with the single-edged sword abruptly swung his sheathed sword, causing multiple blue glowing blades to appear around his body. The teen then ran at the teen with the broadsword, flipping up over his own blade and making his summoned swords disappear and reappear above the other man. The other teen rolled out of the way as the swords came down, but was grabbed by a glowing red hand that grabbed him from the side and slammed him into the ground before returning to the teen with the broadsword. The teen scowled before spinning back to his feet and swinging his broadsword, knocking the redhead's blade into the ground before swinging his entire body and knocking him back into a statue. Voice: despite having their grandfather's blood in their veins, They fought each other as ferociously as bitter rivals, perhaps taking a perverse joy in their fraternal conflict. The warrior with the single-edged sword suddenly appeared behind the one with the broadsword and swung at him. The warrior with the broadsword gritted his teeth as he jumped up and snapped his fingers, disappearing completely. The teen with the broadsword then appeared behind him and both of them panted softly before turning and running at each other. The redhead also ran, and the three of them brought their swords together, knocking them all into the air. The redhead suddenly unlocked metal claws from his gloves and lunged at the broadsword wielder, who suddenly unholstered his guns once more, and the one wearing a vest unsheathed the swords from his back. The three of them lunged forward and knocked their secondary weapons apart, with the one with the broadsword flipping into a kick and knocking the redhead away as he and his opponent each grabbed a sword. However, there was just one question left: who would survive? The two swiftly advanced on each other, and one of them had a single-edged sword embedded in his gut. Both of them gasped, and the teen with the sword in his gut had wide eyes, so his hair covered his eyes. His opponent then took the sword away as the other fell to the ground, reaching up to his head, kicking up the large broadsword from the ground and sweeping his hair back before turning away. The two short swords then fell to the ground, and the teen leaped up and kicked the two swords into the hands of the teen on the ground, embedding them and pinning him to the ground. Desperate to save his cousin, the redhead's eyes widened as he forced himself to stand, but it was too late since the other teenager's blade was lodged in his stomach. The last thing he saw was his enemy, his own brother, piercing him with his own sword. 6 years after the Kyubi assault, Konohagakure no Sato, a man stood outside the city walls wearing ancient dark gray battle armor with a strange gray symbol on it and a long purple cape. His short silver hair was slicked back, but it also appeared to spike back. He held a much larger sword with blue lines glowing along it and a serrated edge in one hand, and his icy blue eyes stared towards the city gates. He noticed a monument above it and turned to look at the fourth figure hanging above. "Son," he said softly as he saw the fourth figure on the mountain and closed his eyes. "I know, I was never there for you. I feared too much for you to get involved with my life. My own fear forced you to live without a father, a mother, a family, like I did," he said softly before shedding a single, unbidden tear. "But no parent, not even I, should ever have to outlive their children," he said, his stern eyes unblinking as he walked towards the city, his frowning as he disappeared in a blue flash of light. Why does everyone hate me?" he muttered to himself dejectedly as he pulled himself along the grass, trying to reach his home, while a small, bloody hand gripped onto the grass and pulled its body from the hole that his attackers had dumped him in. His right foot was at an odd angle, his hair was matted down with his own blood, and it was difficult to see out of his left eye. He screamed in pain as someone stepped on his already crooked foot and he heard laughing voices. The same man exclaimed, "Hey guys," he finally made it out. He heard one of his attackers' voices, but the darkness obscured their faces. "What should we do with it now?" the man asked out loud, and the boy felt a sharp pain in his side from someone kicking him before stepping on the sword that was still embedded in the middle of his back. When one voice from the shadows muttered, "Guys, hurry up, those ANBU that follow him around could come at any minute. I don't want Ibiki or, Kami forbid, Anko get the hands on me when they find out about this," another sneered. The deepest of the three voices said, "Shish, get out of here if you're going to whine and moan, we'll handle the demon ourselves," and the boy yelled as the sword's weight gradually pushed it through his stomach and toward the ground below. "I won't stop till it's suffered like we have," the man said angrily. What's he talking about? I've never made anyone suffer." The youngster whimpered as the man took his foot off the sword's grip, but the anguish persisted even at that point. The second voice called out, "Well, have your fun, I'm not gonna end up in jail for this, so later, morons," and then abruptly disappeared as the boy attempted to extricate himself but screamed in agony when someone stepped on his hand. The first voice said, "Hey, you trying to leave already?" and a foot kicked the boy in the face. "Sorry, well, not really, but we're not through with you just yet," the voice said as the boy's right eye only saw the darkness of the forest where they had cornered him. "So what do we do to him now?" the man asked the other, who chuckled darkly and stepped on the sword again, sending it all the way through the boy to the ground as an ear-piercing scream escaped his lips and filtered the air around them. "Damn, that's gotta hurt," the man said loudly, and his partner simply laughed while the boy blacked out from the pain. The boy woke up in a wet area and then turned to see what appeared to be a sewer. However, what caught his attention were the two pathways in front of him. One had a dark red light emanating from its bowels, and the other had a violet one that was both horrifying and surprisingly calming. The boy glanced at the two halls before moving mindlessly to the violet-colored hall, passing doors with odd symbols on them, a red skull, a calm yellow face, a green angry scowl, a purple foxy grin, a white look of peace, and finally, a blue gasping face. The boy was unsure of the significance of each symbol, but they all seemed to have meaning: the gasp life, the grin power, the skull experience, the calm one rebirth and restoration, the scowl revitalization, and finally, the white one faith. The number 0 was bolded next to each symbol, but he had no idea why it was there. "Welcome," a strange voice said from down the hall, and Naruto noticed another door, but this one was different from the others. It was completely black, with glowing violet symbols etched into it, blue gleaming swords etched into the frame surrounding it, and, finally, it was 3 times the size of the others and was actually 2 doors. "Come," the same dark voice from before called out, but this dark voice was devoid of malice or ill intent. "Enter," the voice called, and the boy turned to face the door. He put his hand back on the door and gave it a gentle push. The symbols all moved from the door to the boy, who yelled and jumped back, the ancient runes swirling on his skin before all moving to his abdomen. "Welcome, my other, we are legion," the creature said, still shrouded in shadow, with only the outline of his body visible, as the big doors creaked loudly and revealed a creature chained to the wall and floor, his violet eyes pointing to the ground until he looked up through the darkness to the boy. "What's going on?" the youngster asked fearfully, tilting his head, then gasping as he felt pain in his gut. Legion just closed his sparkling violet eyes and opened them again. "For one so young to need their devil power," Legion muttered softly before turning to face the boy and seeing strength in his eyes that even the boy was unaware of. "I shall grant you great strength, child, and when you're ready, you shall make use of our true form. Until then, live on and grow stronger," the being said simply as a gold, purple, red, and blue orb appeared before the boy. "Take these, and awaken at last," the being said as the orbs spiraled around the boy before descending inside him. "Awaken now, Naruto Sparta," the being said, its voice weighed with ages of conflict and memories he couldn't even begin to imagine. The boy's eyes widened as a beat that sounded like a heartbeat began to thump loudly in his ears. He fell to his knees and gritted his teeth as he felt something seemingly awaken, and then felt a warmth flow over his body as something soon stood before him. It had 3 blood-red eyes and was like the last being, shrouded in the shadows, but this one had some sort of power, and its very presence seemed to demand respect. A second being, with only 2 but equally red eyes, stood behind Naruto and did the same, turning into blood and flowing into the boy. Pure power spiraled around the young blonde as his hair turned to the color of blood, his whisker marks deepened and stretched over most of his cheeks to more closely look like stripes, and the pupils of his eyes became very thin slits. "Who are you?" Naruto asked the air, then screamed as pain surged throughout his entire body, then seemed to vanish. "The real world, etc." An explosion of violet and red energy knocked back the two men who had been torturing the boy. At first, they thought it was chakra, but it was too different from the chakra they knew. Then, the blood and shadows surrounding the boy began to swirl, forming a sphere that completely obscured him from view. The blood and shadows then began to change into a new form, with the boy still hidden inside as it stretched to form legs with clawed toes, large demonic wings sprouting from its back, two horns growing from the sides and curved downward then inward, clawed hands formed in long, slender arms, and finally, three glowing red eyes opened and glared down at the two men. One of the men exclaimed, "Oh shit," as the big creature reached out and grabbed him, lifting him up while kicking and screaming, before lumbering towards his partner. The man could only stare in shock and amazement because the creature had already taken away his ability to move and some higher brain functions before using his friend as a club to knock both of them through the closest tree and lumbering towards them while still glaring at them. Only 4 members of the entire ANBU force could be trusted with the task of protecting one Naruto Uzumaki. The first was Kakashi Hatake, the strongest jounin in the village and a former student of Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. The second was Tenzu, a man who liked the boy and trusted the fourth seal. The third was Yugawa Yuzuki, who detested seeing people treated poorly, even when it was the boy's fault, and finally, Itachi Uchiha, the strongest member of the Uchiha clan and a ninja prodigy. Normally, at least one of those 4 would be keeping an eye on Naruto, but all at once, a disturbance downtown had called all of active ANBU to earn their pay. Someone had broken into a high-security prison and freed a number of inmates. None of them were villains, but it took all of ANBU's resources to apprehend them, even with Jounin and Chunin's help. Yugawa had been close to Naruto's house when she captured one of the inmates and noticed that the door had been broken. Since she couldn't see any trail, she hurried with her prisoner to Kakashi and explained what she had witnessed. The man had instantly called his nin dogs and ordered them to go out and look for the boy or his trail. But the man in armor was hiding in the shadows, and he watched as they went in search of the boy before feeling a tremendous burst of power and leaving to find its source. He knew that power was the same as his own and his brother's, but it felt a little different. He actually smirked as he found the clearing and saw that creature made of shadows and blood, which was uncommon even among devils. His brother had made one of lightning and shadows when he was younger and in mortal danger, and he himself had made one of ice and wind while he was trapped in hell, but shadows and blood were uncommon even among devils. However, Virgil's eyes widened in amazement when a ring of fire appeared around him, and he saw the 2 unconscious humans at his feet. Virgil said, "I wouldn't hurt them too badly," and proceeded to approach the creature as it turned to glare down at him angrily. "If you do, then the people in this village will chase you down forever," Virgil said, and as the sphere vanished, the creature appeared to narrow its eyes in curiosity. The creature that stood in place of the man had silver hair as well, but it was shaped like a samurai helmet, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, glowing green eyes, and an odd object on its left arm that held his single-edged sword while the other was still in hand. "And if you want, I can take you somewhere safe, where you won't ever have to worry about being hurt ever again," the man said, sounding odd now, almost like the creature Naruto had met in that strange sewer. He looked at the red-eyed creature, and it nodded and closed its eyes, sending blood and shadows back to the ground. In the center of it was a small boy with blood-red hair. Virgil was once again encircled by a sphere of energy, and he reappeared from where the demon had been standing. "Then let's take you home then," he whispered, taking the young boy into his arms and grinning at him, "grandson," before turning and disappearing into a blue flash. When the ANBU arrived later, they would discover a Chunin and another ANBU on the ground, along with a large amount of blood. The two were then taken into custody and given to Anko and Ibiki to play with. When the search for Naruto was finally completed, the city's citizens celebrated the demon's death with a parade, but Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, chose to stay at home and grieve the loss of a good-hearted boy to cruel idiots. However, Naruto wouldn't be gone forever. No Sato Akumagakure. Akumagakure, also known as the village hidden by the demons, was distinct from other shinobi villages. While some were one big city, Akumagakure was actually 5 cities spread out along the mountain range that surrounded it, one in the north, one in the east, one in the west, one in the south, and one in the center. Ironically, they chose to name them after each of those directions, but each city was connected by a train route. In contrast to the other nations, which had allies close by or abundant resources to utilize, Akumagakure was secluded within a huge valley that was entirely encircled by mountains that were difficult to scale. The cities of Akuma surrounding Central are all medium-sized, with Central being the largest and the location of the Onigage. The north is the most industrious of the nations and provides various technologies to the others, while the south is essentially the area that one must travel to in order to leave Akuma. East is known for being more of a farm country, raising livestock and agricultural products, while west is essentially a city owned by civilians, and ninja reside in Central. However, when the city was first formed, they had to start developing more transportation technology than just jutsu in order to survive, which they accomplished with the assistance of the third Onigage, Dante Sparta. After the massive influx of people from their sister city, Haibungakure, Dante and his wife Trish helped the village recover. Under his leadership, the village gained strength, and he changed the way ninja would act in the demon village going forward. A mission was no longer more important than a man's life, and as more nin returned alive, their years of experience were preserved, providing the next generation with more qualified teachers than just Chunin. However, the remote area of Akumagakure was also home to a significant number of bandits and thieves because the trains, there were easy prey unless ninja were present. Dante co-developed the train as well, but he claimed that it had already been created long ago and that he didn't claim credit for it. Instead, the northern scientists created a method of storing chakra and using it as a power source for the train and other later developed vehicles. Cell phones were also created because of the great need for people to stay in touch among the people living in the cities. In terms of educational systems, Akumagakure was actually more inventive than the other countries. While they had all of their children attend a ninja academy or simply remain at home, Akuma had a single ninja academy and multiple civilian schools, instead, allowing all of their children to receive an education. The Ninja Academy is located in Central City, just like most other ninja wares, while the other schools are dispersed throughout the other cities. Additionally, Akuma uses a different ranking system than other countries, with a genin being called a deuce, a chunin being called a demon, a jounin being called a fiend, an ANBU member being a Nero Angelo, a sannin being an archfiend, and kage being called devil. In order to confuse the other countries in the world, which all use the same titles, the village uses those names instead of the usual ranking on missions. The village is actually quite cleverly designed, and because the mountains provide natural protection, it has never been attacked, aside from by inside forces, who are swiftly dealt with. The village occasionally receives missions from outside nations, and they charge significantly less than other nations, only because they are unable to barter with them. The villages, Neroangelos, are their own version of ANBU. These men were trained by Dante at first, and they trained their predecessors after he became Onakage. The group's primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of the village, so a strict code was put in place to ensure that no dishonest characters could enter. The punishments for breaking the codes are severe and harsh, frightening anyone who would dare attempt to do so. Death is never used, though some claim it would be lenient compared to what they do to them. The leader of the Neroangelo Corps is an unnamed man who has led the group for more than 10 years today, which is a lot longer than any ANBU member has ever lasted. I'm so glad I learned how to teleport rather than learning some useless skill like painting, Virgil smirked as he reappeared before the gates to Akumogakure. He lived in Central, the main military area of Akumogakure, but he lived in a large mansion near the northeast edge of the city. It didn't hurt that he didn't know his brother was still alive and kicking either. He'd probably try and get me to live with him like when we were kids, Virgil muttered, shaking his head, and made his way home, Naruto still in his arms. The silver-haired man, however, felt a distinct sense of foreboding in the air, and it was making him uneasy. "Calm down, Virgil, it's nothing," he reprimanded himself as he walked. "Although, maybe she found me and still wants my head for getting her pregnant," he said to himself, shivering as he thought of the blonde woman with whom he had Minato years ago. "Virgil, stop thinking of how she will either kill you, maybe hug you, and focus on being alive long enough to protect your grandson," he said to himself. There were 2 boys before his door, one of them unconscious, the other sweaty, filthy, and panting as he held the other boy's arm over his shoulder. Both boys appeared to be younger, but still mirror images of themselves, with their hair pointing down and different clothes. "Uncle Virgil, they got Mom," said the only one awake of the 2, and Virgil hurried to catch them. He put Naruto and the 2 boys down and closed his eyes, feeling even more dread than before as he tried to sense his brother's demonic power, only to stiffen. It was gone. TBC, Akumogakure no Sato, Virgil's home outside of Central City. "My family's cursed to suffer as all we care for is taken from us," was the only thought running through Virgil Sparta's mind as he looked at little Virgil sitting down with a dejected look while little Dante was unconscious on his couch and Naruto in a bed upstairs. "What happened, Virgil?" Virgil asked, and the young boy lowered his head. This was in addition to the fact that he had just learned that his grandson was attacked by his own village and that his nephews had to endure watching as their own mother was killed by demons. It was getting late. Dad was taking Dante around looking for some low-level demons to kill. I was at home, studying as usual. Mom was downstairs, I think doing the dishes, when we started to hear the screams. Dante ran in and said he and Dad were attacked. Mom told us to go hide. I grabbed Dante and dragged him out back. We waited in a crack in the next door wall. When we started to hear more fighting, I was able to see a window. Dante was looking with me," Virgil softly said as the older of the 2 grasped the boy's head. "It's okay, Virgil, you don't have to continue," Virgil said, and the boy nodded slowly. The older warrior, on the other hand, turned away and walked to an old window, looking out into the night's darkness with a momentary sad expression on his face. "Virgil, you've done what I couldn't," he thought softly as he glanced at the other silver-haired boy out of the corner of his eye. "You've managed to make sure Dante doesn't become what I was," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Virgil, I'm not going to lie to you, this won't get any easier. I should know," Virgil said, and his nephew closed his eyes. Virgil groans and peers out his window as he asks, "Uncle, how did you handle it?" I blocked it out," he says softly as he approaches the window and looks out at the dark city, which is almost exactly like the night he had this same experience. "I went and fought the demons and was dragged into hell with nothing but my mother's amulet, and father's sword, Yamato, to help me," Virgil said softly and closed his eyes. "I lived in hell for years, my mind slowly withered in the demon world, all my sanity slipping away as I had to fight for my life until finally I just snapped," Virgil said, his face shadowed as his eyes briefly began to glow a dark red light. "I became a demon. I learned that there, if you're weak, you die, if you're strong, you rule, if you're strong, so you're strong," Virgil said, and his nephew sighed. The boy said, "That's why you went after Sparta's power," and Virgil gave a nod before letting out a sigh. Virgil replied, "Enough sadness, Virgil. This night doesn't need any more tears. I have some good news, though," and Virgil smiled feebly. Virgil grinned as he remarked, "I could use that," then blinked and scented the air before turning to face the doorway and noticing a mop of red hair attempting to conceal itself. Virgil smirked and said, "Well, if your cousin would stop hiding, we might be able to introduce you to him," and Virgil blinked in surprise before quickly standing up and following his uncle's line of sight. The younger Virgil approached the red-haired boy stealthily before disappearing into a flash of blue light, which caused Virgil to raise an eyebrow. "He can already teleport," Virgil thought, frowning. Dante really screwed up when he ignored that boy's training in favor of his little clone, the blue-clad swordsman thought. "Why are you hiding?" he asked, and Naruto leaped to his feet with a yelp. Virgil, who was still grinning, frowned at the child as he began to breathe heavily before turning back to face the room and then back to the youngster with a wide-open mouth. The youngster asked, "How did you get behind me?" and then a shadow passed over both him and Virgil as the older boy in the room gazed at them without interest. Hi," replied Naruto uneasily, and the older Virgil laughed quietly. He said, "Hello, Naruto Uzumaki," and the red-headed creature gulped. When he said, Where am I?" Virgil knelt down. He tells the youngster, "My home," and Naruto blinks. He asks, "Then why am I here?" and Virgil laughs to himself again. Virgil asks with a tinge of humor, "Well, couldn't let my grandson live on the streets or some god-forsaken apartment now, could I?" The red-headed man gawks. Virgil nods in response to his loud question, Why you my grandfather?" "But you look so young," he screams, as the young Virgil chuckles to himself. Virgil smirked and said to the gaping young man, "That's what I said when I first found out, but really he's around 1,000 years old." The boy screams, "Wow! Old man Hokage must be like 1,000,000 then." Little Virgil bursts out laughing, and Virgil smirks at the two. Reminiscent of a little girl who said something similar when he was 1,000 years younger, Virgil grinned and added, "All right then, Naruto, I'd like you to meet your cousin, Virgil, with an I, Sparta." Of course, the girl wasn't named Virgil. Wait, I have family," said Naruto joyfully, hugging Virgil, who pushed him away as I began to quiver. "No hugging," he muttered frowningly before he felt an arm draped over his shoulder. His brother comments, "Oh come on brow, you know you love getting hugs," as if he had just awakened up. Virgil said, "Shut up Dante," and shoved his sibling aside as Naruto gazed at the two in confusion. The two blinked as he said, "Hey, why do you two look the same but have different voices?" The two simultaneously asked their uncle, "We have different voices?" and Virgil laughed. When Virgil replied, "Yes, Dante, your voice doesn't sound as royal as Virgil's and mine, much like your father," Dante scowled. The child pouted and replied, "Whatever, and it's dirge, not Dante, I'm not my dad you know," at which Naruto snickered. After he replied, "You two are funny," the three turned to face a suddenly smiling Virgil. "Why do I have a bad feeling?" Naruto asked, and the twins went pale. "He has that sneaky expression in his eyes," Dirge remarked as he retreated from the elderly man. Virgil said, then turned to face the other boys before listening with a hand to one ear. "I think I hear the evil devil squirrel calling. Yes, he needs me to go away from here and kill him now," Virgil said, as he fled out the door, his twin and Naruto both giving him a strange look before growling. They both yelled indignantly, "He ditched us," as Virgil seized them both. "Then we have to catch him. I need to start training you and him, Naruto, and Dirge and I need to finish his own," Virgil said as he hurried after the young silver-haired boy. "I haven't had this much fun since that time when me and Dante tied Dad's shoelaces together and stole his swords," the Demon Knight thought to himself as he saw Virgil, Naruto, and Dirge laughing as they leaped out and onto the boy. "Alright, fun time's over," Virgil said suddenly serious, and both Naruto and Dirge moaned. "Hey, I'm going to be training you all, so don't whine about it," he said to the two, and Naruto pouts before blinking. "Hey, hold on a second," he says, surveying the landscape and only noticing a few things. "We're not in Konoha?" he asks, glancing about, and Virgil smirks. He has his hands full with these three. After 6 years, people always come first in the village of the Hidden Demon, which also has some of the best ninja training in all of the shinobi nations. As a result, their educational system must be very different from other schools. It begins with basic skills in a elementary school, just like in the old days, followed by a middle school for intermediate work and a high school for more advanced skills. However, this is for civilians, and all children who wish to become ninja attend the Ninja Academy from the age of 6 to 12. The academy's instructors are all former Akumigakure shinobi who were removed from service either because they retired or were unable to continue their shinobi work due to a medical condition. Nevertheless, the village is determined to retain these warriors to pass on their knowledge to the next generation of shinobi, which has helped the village's shinobi thrive. Even though they don't often have missions outside of the village, an Akumigakure nin never fails because they have the training and skills necessary for even C and B class missions straight out of the Ninja Academy. Additionally, the graduation examinations differ slightly from those in other villages. All shinobi graduates should take the Akumigakure test, which examines you on multiple levels, while Kiri tests you on the 3 fundamental ninjutsu after you kill your best buddy Konoha. In order to become a true ninja in the Hidden Demon Village, Oninin must possess the following qualities: stealth, precision, endurance, intuition, skill, and physical ability. As a result, the training is much more rigorous, with the older ex-shinobi pushing each generation harder than the last to raise the academy's standards annually, something that other villages have been lacking in recent years. They do not allow anyone who is not qualified to pass, if they have any practical abilities for being a nin, so no fangirls ever pass. They are expelled from the academy completely, or if they show some promise, they must retake the entire course. The town hasn't had a nin go rouge since its inception, though, not because there aren't any bad seeds in its shinobi ranks but rather because they quickly eliminate them. Shinobi and civilians alike are forbidden from breaking Akumigakure's regulations. If they did, they would perish. The shinobi final exams were well underway, and despite all of his training, the lone surviving shinobi was still struggling a little. He ran through the shadows, silently, using the chakra he used to cushion every step. He saw figures in his mind, and they laughed and taunted him with demonic faces and evil grins. He saw their faces and swiftly threw 4 kunai, each hitting the mark on a bullseye set up on 4 trees. He sped past those 2 and held the single-edged sword in his left hand, Gilver, carved into the bottom of the sword's hilt. With a smirk on his face, the boy jumped over a narrow gorge with ease, tossed 4 more kunai while still in the air, rolled, landed in a crouch, and dashed forwards again. The sword was more valuable to him than anything else. It was a gift from his grandfather, and it was his responsibility to restore honor to it for what he had done with it. Blades were, in fact, much more fun to use than any other weapon he had ever tried, well, aside from gauntlets. He saw shapes in the distance that resembled men, but he also saw flashes of sharp blades before him, and he grinned as the scythes came down. He swiftly unshed Gilver and killed the scythe wielders with a single blow, moving forward without turning around and sheathing the blade as he went. There was a long, wide chasm ahead, and it would be dangerous to jump, but he loved a challenge, and this was just too much fun to pass up. He grinned broadly as he leaped to the pole next to the hole, and then threw himself back to the ground and rolled to his feet, quickly gunning off again. He saw something in the dark again, just out of the corner of his eye, and it was chasing him. He smiled, his eyes flashing red with excitement for a moment. He saw a tree ahead and ran up it, adding chakra to his feet before jumping off and quickly unsheathing his sword to cut one down and duck under a kunai before stabbing the other and running away, his sword sheathed once more as the 2 chain links embedded in the blade's pommel clattered as he ran. Even as he ran, his eyes were glowing with a low red light that seemed to be that of a winged armored knight, as he seemed to fit into the shadows with ease and wield a single-edged sword. The boy ignored his changed shadow, but as he lunged into a spin, putting one hand on the ground and propelling himself upwards as a fireball struck the spot where he had been before, he landed on all 4s, his sword still in hand and his eyes still glowing with a menacing light. His piercing gaze easily cut through the darkness around him, and he saw his attackers. He quickly unsheathed Gilver again and moved, slicing and dicing noises filling the forest as these attackers were also killed, his sword sheathed with a snap. Pathetic, he muttered, then sped off again, his eyes clear with determination. But the boy's eyes flashed for a split second before vanishing into the darkness as he gripped the handle of his katana. He scanned the darkness around him, crouching and narrowing his eyes, making sure that whoever it was wasn't playing with him. He brandished his blade at his side, grinding his sandals into the dirt for better traction, when he heard the shunk of an unsheathed sword and moved quickly. Blades clashed, as brilliant flashes of light scattered throughout the trees, one of which was sliced, falling slowly as if carved by the sharpest blade in the world. A nearby rock had a gash that was the size and width of a relatively thin blade. The boy flipped back as his opponent slashed the area he had been in, landed in a crouch, and glared forwards, easily seeing his opponent even in the darkness. This was what he had been taught to do at first, fighting in the dark when the real nightmares would come after him and the people he cared for. He snarled as he crouched, his opponent holding his own much larger blade horizontally in front of his body, looking at each other with a stony expression, neither of them bothering to try to move. When a man wearing a typical Jounin outfit for a oninin walked out with one arm missing, the boy smirked to himself and said, "Perfect, top scores my boy, that wad beyond even my expectations." The 2 boys blinked before turning to face the light. "Excellent work helping out with this dirge," and thanks for the Kage Bunshin shadow," the voice said. He asked in a haughty manner, "Hey, was there any doubt?" while sheathing his sword behind his back and then holding it at his side. The sword appeared to be without a guard, though, and it had no wrappings around the handle. The pommel was peculiar because it had 2 chain links and blue cloth tied twice around it, close to the pommel. When a very silky voice said, "Yes, you were doubting yourself earlier today if that's what you mean," the boy grinned and turned to face the Jounin. Naruto also noticed 2 other individuals, a girl and the same person he had been fighting. The boy who spoke had his arms crossed over his chest with black and blue wrist protectors adorning his wrists. On his torso was a black shirt with a mask around his neck, a leather vest that seemed to have some armoring and shined a dark blue in the light above it. His pants were black with pockets on the sides. An Akumigakure-issued kunai pouch on his left thigh. His sandals were black and blue, with snowshoe attachments to make them into steel-toed boots. They covered his knees with slight armor plating and kept his pants tight on his legs from the knees below. Around his waist was black and blue armor that covered his hips and thighs. 2 short swords hanging at his sides with a long ornate katana in one of his hands, a yellow ribbon flowing from its own hilt. The boy's face was regal, with shaggy silver hair slicked backwards with some bangs hanging down in his regal face, cold blue eyes gazing at Naruto even with the amused smirk playing on his lips. Around his neck was his own Akumigakure headband, the horns it bared traveling the sides of his neck. The sword-wielding madman Naruto was proud to name his cousin. Let out a loud yell, "Ah, come on Veer," he was just a little nervous, you know. However, Virgil had begun to insist on tests to demonstrate that he was, in fact, related to the silver-haired moron, as Veer would frequently say. This boy shared Virgil's regal face, but he was wearing a black leather swordsman's coat with black bandages wrapped around his neck and lower face, his silver spiky hair pulled into a low ponytail to cover his left eye, and a forehead protector in its proper place. His right arm was covered in black bands that were attached to the coat by red strips of cloth, and his chest was covered by a black version of the Akumigakure Anbu's armor. His hands had red fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back of each hand, and a pair of tight black gloves underneath those. His own black pants were a little looser than Virgil's, with his kunai case on his right thigh and black sandals covering them at the bottom while red bands covered them. A large broadsword with intricate design was sheathed on his back, and 2 guns were holstered underneath it. As Dirge put his arm around Virgil's shoulders, the other silver-haired boy grabbed it and threw his brother into a tree, causing the girl to gag into her hands. Swords were drawn, and a brawl broke out as the girl had to hold her stomach while she laughed loudly at the 2 quarreling siblings as they beat the shit out of each other. Virgil had a habit of hugging and friendly contact, and he didn't mind. He just wished Dirge would go hug him or someone who liked him. "You two are such babies, I bet you even still wet the bed," the girl exclaimed loudly before falling back and making a valiant effort, but failing to contain her laughter as she thought about the silver-haired boys. The girl had golden yellow eyes that shone brightly, long glossy black hair with natural blue streaks that covered her right eye and was pulled into a low ponytail, though some of it fell down her cheeks and to her chest anyhow, and her hitai was in its proper place. Her lips were ebony, and her ears pointed back slightly, giving her the appearance of some magical creature from old legends. She wore skin-tight black shorts, black fingerless gloves, steel plates over the back, black bands around her biceps, and black sandals on her feet. She wore black leather armor around her hips, which was attached to some cloth tied at the side into a sash, and her forearms and shins were covered in white and gray armor. The girl stopped laughing when she felt a cold grip on her heart and looked up to see 2 very angry-looking devil hunters. No hard feelings," she asked sheepishly, and Dirge and Virgil both looked at each other before grabbing her by her armor. The two boys, however, were not amused by their step-sister's words and nodded curtly before getting up and stalking towards her. She could defend herself and probably learn a lesson about not messing with Dirge and Veer, but he really enjoyed being the knight in shining armor for her. Naruto yelled, "Whoa guys, don't hurt her. She's still a member of your team," and the two of them looked at their red-headed cousin with irritated expressions as he entered the light. He liked them, had changed over the years, and had become the peacemaker when Shadow would incite his cousin's wrath. His skin was pale like his cousin's, and his own piercing blue eyes were similar to theirs. His forehead was covered in black bandages to keep the hair out of his eyes, and he wore a long black coat with white trim and short sleeves that adorned his torso. A leather band crossed over his chest with straps around his shoulders to hold the coat on tightly. He wore a black shirt underneath the coat with a pair of black pants with white stripes on the legs, his own black sandals covering them from the shin down with black bands over his shins to keep them on tight, and his hands were adorned with black fingerless gloves that resembled the ones his grandfather wore as a child. "You're too nice to Shadow sometimes," Virgil muttered as he let go of the girl, and Dirge groaned because they were never able to enjoy themselves anymore. "So, instructor, does he pass?" Virgil asked the almost forgotten old shinobi, who laughed and rubbed the back of his neck before nodding his head in agreement with the silver-haired boy. "Good, we should go celebrate then. I believe Tifa might have a new shipment of strawberry syrup and ice cream at her shop," Virgil said, causing Dirge to smile broadly. He yelled, "Hell yeah! Strawberry sundaes on me," as he ran back towards town. Virgil moaned, shaking his head and turning to face the Jounin. The man laughed softly and threw a headband to Naruto, who swapped the black wrappings around his head for the item. Virgil then put his own on, pulled it over his eyes, and raised his face mask to hide his face because he didn't want to be chased by fangirls all the way to Tifa's shop. Then, Virgil turned to face Naruto, and the two of them nodded before running after Dirge. Shadow yelled at the boy in frustration as they ran away, and she pursued him. Virgil had met Tifa Lockhart by chance almost 6.5 years ago, a little girl who lived with her father and ran an old shack of a bar downtown in the southern part of Central City. He had been with his father at the time, and the 9-year-old had been very interested in the city, but only because he was bored while Dirge was training. Dante had taken his son exploring the city, and the two discovered the charming little shack of a bar, and Dante fell in love. Virgil, well, he liked the company more than the nostalgia of the old-fashioned bar, especially the company of his close friend Tifa Lockhart, the daughter of the place's owner. It would become customary for Dante and Virgil to travel to the old dive at least once a week, just to relax from the stresses of their daily lives. Dante liked the small dive because it reminded him of a place called Bobby's from when he was 1,000 years younger, when all the nin hung around waiting for the next job and paycheck. Although Virgil had only positive memories of the store, he continued to visit it more frequently after his father passed away. However, he always ordered an extra strawberry sundae and said it was for his father. After saying this, he would become very quiet because the only times he had ever been truly happy with his father were when he would laugh at the way Dante would look after finishing a sundae, with red and white smeared over his mouth like a clown. He would also get lost in nostalgia while eating his own, not as messy as his father, but still enjoying the dish. A few years after arriving in Akumogakure, Naruto had met Tifa and her father. He also discovered a place to love in the old dive. Tifa's father was a cousin to the Ichiraku family in Konoha and could make ramen just as well as old Tucci. This made Naruto happy because it reminded him of the few precious people he had left in Konoha. He wouldn't trade his family in Akuma for anything, but he still missed some of them. Thus, whenever Virgil chose to visit Tifa's seventh heaven, the red head would follow. However, the location seemed a little more solemn because Tifa's father passed away. When they arrived at Tifa's seventh heaven, Dirge attempted to enter. "Hold it," Tifa's voice said as she placed a hand on the silver-haired Genin's, or rather, Dusa's, chest. "No weapons," she said frowningly, and Dirge let out a loud groan. Tifa was likely one of the sexiest girls in Central City, at least according to Dirge, and Virgil didn't consider her anything but a friend, which is why he was referred to as dense and ignorant. She wore a white, low-cut, sleeveless shirt that exposed her belly, a tight black miniskirt with a gray belt and black suspenders, long black gloves with red fingerless armored gloves over them, and brown hiking boots. As might be expected, the outfit attracted a lot of attention, but she wouldn't say who. Of course, she didn't like the attention from other guys and tended to beat the living daylights out of anyone who chose to look at her. If Virgil was nearby, he would chop them to ribbons, saying he wouldn't allow them to dishonor her in any way. He muttered, yeah, and gave her rebellion before attempting to enter, but Tifa threw him out the door. Tifa, who wasn't a ninja, had a teacher, and she became a normal girl who just so happened to know how to kick your ass if you got too frisky with her. Dirge exclaimed, "What the heck, Tifa?" and Tifa crossed her arms over her ample bust. Virgil simply sighed in frustration, took out his own swords, gave them to Tifa, and his kunai pouch, before entering. Tifa grinned at her friend as he did so. "That's what's up. All of your weapons, Dirge," Tifa said, setting the weapons from Virgil in a space designated for his belongings. There was also a space for Naruto, Dirge, and Shadow, and although Shadow's real name was Janet, she actually preferred the name Shadow. Before Dirge could comply, though, Naruto gave her a metal glove he received for his birthday last year, his own weapons pouch, and a gill. Tifa sighed and put those into a space for Naruto's belongings, Virgil, and the others so that they could retrieve them when they wanted to go rather than her holding onto them herself. Dirge responded, "Oh, okay," and gave her his kunai pouch. When he attempted to enter again, Tifa snatched one of his arms and held it at an unnatural angle against his back. She then removed ebony and ivory from him and threw him inside. "I swear, Dirge, do we really have to go through this every time you want to get in?" the girl asked in an irritated tone, and Dirge shrugged before flipping up and approaching the counter. Tifa then aimed at Shadow and scowled. "All right, hand 'em over," she said, and Shadow gave her her kunai pouches, but Tifa pushed her back out and cleared her throat. Shadow blinked, then got down and took two small knives from her sandals and gave them to Tifa. However, the girl pushed her back out again and scowled. Shadow blinked and laughed nervously, taking a trench knife from each of her shoulder padding and giving it to Tifa. Once more, the busty girl pushed her out, and Shadow reached behind herself into her armor and took out a hand scythe. When Tifa pushed her out again, Naruto said, "Damn," and his two friends nodded their heads. Shadow laughed uneasily, reaching around her waist, lifting the armor there, and drawing out what appeared to be a whip. "Why does she have a whip?" Naruto asked, and his cousins shivered before glaring at him. "What?" he asked, and they scowled. "Don't give us those images, our minds can't take it," Virgil said, and Dirge nodded in agreement. Just when it appeared that Shadow might finally enter, Tifa shoved her out again, and the girl appeared ready to start yelling as she took some Senbon needles from the bands on her arms and gave them to Tifa, who shoved her out again. She then went into the front of her armor, causing all the boys to blink, and extracted what appeared to be a compressed Fuma shuriken. Naruto gaped and shouted, "How the hell can you walk with all that?" Shadow shrugged. She added, "It's good training," but was interrupted again. "Damn it," she cried, then pulled off her forearm guards and gave them to Tifa, who grinned and carried the enormous quantity of weapons to her own place. Shadow then walked inside to sit with Naruto. Naruto asked abruptly, "What's in those?" and Shadow sighed. She whispered, "Blades are hidden in them," and Naruto blinked. Shadow rolled her eyes in response to Naruto's query, "Isn't it a bit paranoid to carry so many weapons?" She angrily remarked, "You call it paranoia, I call it being prepared," as Tifa stood in front of them. Tifa smiled and said, "All right, now that ordeal has passed by, what can I get you guys?" The boy and girl in front of her gave Tifa their orders, and she promptly returned with 2 strawberry sundaes and sat them close to Virgil. Dirge snatched the extra, ripped off his bandages, and began eating it, while she went to get Naruto and Shadow's ramen and laid them out in front of the two, who smiled and tucked in. "All right, I see you passed your exam, huh, Naruto?" Tifa smirked, and Naruto smiled. "Yep," he stated plainly, and Shadow gave a head nod. While Virgil remained mute and consumed his sundae, Tifa grinned and remarked, "Then you and Shadow get those free. Dirge on the other hand has to pay double for eating Virgil's second order." The other Sparta in the room gave her a disbelieving look. Dirge cried out, "What? But he never eats them." Tifa placed his own sundae in front of him and scowled at him. Dirge muttered, "It's the principle of the thing, Virgil ordered it, he can do what he wants with it," but remained silent as Tifa gave her friend a worried look. His eyes appeared glassy and aloof, possibly recalling the times he and his father visited the old dive all those years ago. Dirge eventually said, "Whatever," and carried on eating his sundae. Virgil glanced at his brother out of the corner of his eye and sighed when he noticed that Dirge resembled his father from when they had come for a sundae, with red strawberry juice and white ice cream all over his mouth like a clown. The silver-haired boy then turned to an antique clock and sighed to himself again. Tifa inquired, "So Naruto, what team are you going to be on?" The redhead shrugged his shoulders thoughtfully. He murmured, "Got me," and Virgil inhaled his own 2 fragrances. When Virgil said plainly, "Probably ours, brother's being promoted so we need a new member," Tifa blinked. Virgil groaned as she asked, "I thought you were going to be promoted too?" Looking at the empty bowl of his sundae, Virgil said simply, "Naruto nor Shadow are being promoted. What would be the point of my own promotion if I left them with some incompetent fool, before leaving some cash on the table and leaving the building?" "Thank you," he said. "What's with him?" Shadow asked, and Naruto and Dirge exchanged knowing glances as their relative left Tifa's little dive and disappeared into the night. Armed with his weapons back, he walked through the city, leading to the cemetery, more significantly, to the empty graves of his mother and father, since the bodies were never discovered. He muttered, 6 years, and sat down. "You've both been gone for 6 years, and I haven't changed much, not much at all," Virgil told himself as he gazed at the graves. "You're not even buried here, but it helps me cope somehow," he said, before turning to face the sky with sorrowful blue eyes. "Did you have to go through this, father, living without them, wishing you could have done something but knowing it's impossible?" Virgil asked, hearing footsteps. According to his uncle's regal tone, yes he did, and for a time now I have also, and Virgil nodded silently. I heard Naruto passed his test. I'm surprised you're not celebrating with him and the others, Virgil said while seated next to his clone, as a number of people were thinking about him. Vigil said plainly, I'm never happy not on this day, and his uncle sighed. The younger Sparta looked down as Virgil stated, living in the past will destroy you, Virgil. Live for today, fight for tomorrow, and never look back on the past. That's the best way to remember your father. He whispered, how do you know? And Virgil laughed. He responded simply, because, that's what your father did, and Virgil nodded his head before casting a sorrowful glance up into the sky. He remarked simply, a storm approaches, as the rain began to fall, pelting the silver-haired young man with tiny droplets until Virgil covered him with his cape. As they headed back to Tifa's little dive, Virgil wisely remarked, after all, the dead cannot share in our joy, or our sorrow, and Virgil nodded. Come, let's be with your friends tonight, not the dead, he said simply. And besides, I have a feeling that your adventures after today will need you to rest, Virgil added, raising a brow to his uncle, who merely grinned before they vanished in a flash of light. Shinobi Kage Tower, Akumagakure. As Dirge received their mission from the Onigage, Naruto sat with Virgil and Shadow. The new Nero Angelo was assigned to them to ensure that Naruto got along with his cousin and secret crush. They all thought it was absurd to have a NA with them because they had been friends before they were even ninja. The silver-haired Nin sighed to himself when Naruto questioned his cousin, so, what do you think our first mission will be, Veer? The elder adolescent complained, probably train duty, and Naruto arched an eyebrow. He had heard of train duty from Dirge and Shadow when she was having a rough day, but he had never really understood why no one liked receiving it. Primarily, train duty was categorized as a D to C class mission because the team's only activity was riding a train and keeping an eye out for bandits of some kind. The only issue was that priority cargo was never on those trains, and in order to protect priority cargo, one would need to be on an A-class mission at the very least. Naruto had heard that Dirge, Shadow, and Virgil had once been on an A-class mission, but he wasn't sure if that was a train duty mission or one of the regular A-class missions because the intel was classified for some reason. Virgil said, "Oh Naruto, I almost forgot, Uncle Virgil said to tell you he was going off on a mission," and Naruto groaned after blinking. The red-headed Sparta said, "Where's he going this time?" and Virgil shrugged. Virgil remarked, "All he said was that he was going to go find your grandmother, and he left you a gift for when you graduated from the academy," before taking out a statue of some kind colored like obsidian from his weapons pouch. When Naruto inquired, "What the hell is that?" Virgil shrugged again and handed it to him. Virgil responded, "I really wouldn't know." Uncle Virgil said that it was something called a legion. Other than that, I believe he mentioned it being a summon, but that's all I know, and Naruto cocked his head to gaze at the alleged legion in his palm, only to raise an eyebrow. He said, "Gilt the sword," and turned to face Virgil, who shrugged again and then looked off into space with a bored expression on his visible face, that is, his eyes. Naruto sighed and examined the ancient-looking statue, which was made of obsidian and was only 4 inches tall and barely an inch to 2 inches wide. It had a torso that turned into a curved spike that attached to a thin cylindrical part that was surrounded by a ring, which was open near the back but unfinished. After Shadow questioned, "Your uncle is weird, why would he give you a silly-looking statue?" she took the alleged legion from Naruto and began to carefully examine every detail. "It's made of some weird form of metal, although it looks like stone at first glance it has more detail than a normal statue this size would and seems to almost be alive, she said, and Naruto rolled his eyes before putting the Legion statue inside his coat. Shadow shrugged her shoulders and said, "We'll figure out what it is later. Right now all I want is Dirge to come out with our mission assignment already." But when the door opened and Dirge emerged with her father, the Yonde Monokage, or Abel Negrado, she smiled broadly. Naruto was still irritated that they were trapped in the tower. "Alright kids, you can probably guess you're getting train duty," Abel said, and the 3 level Nin in the room all moaned loudly. "Hey, I know it can be boring but it has to be done. Now then, the only one I can give you is the train heading for West City. Dirge will fill you all in about the mission once you board the train," Abel said, and Naruto moaned. The Onokage was presently wearing black Kage robes with red kanji for Demon Shadow on his back. His black hair was slicked back like Virgil's, and had red streaks running through it. "Father, as much as I like to agree with you on these matters, what is the purpose of sending us to guard a civilian train? I don't believe that bandits would attack them, not with more important things like supplies or technology coming from East or North City, not to mention money and foreigners from South," Virgil asked. Abel let out a sigh, raised his neck. Abel explained, "Yes, true, but every train has to be protected or else the bandits will start attacking more often. There's no telling when a bandit may or may not show up, so besides you guys get paid to do it," before grinning at the 3 who stood up and shrugged. "Okay, then, normally I'd go with you but I'm needed at a meeting in North City, so Dirge will be in charge of this mission. Considering he was able to make it to Nero Angelo status, I'd say he's qualified for the job," Abel said, removing his robes and leaving the children alone. Dirge snarled, "Geez. If this is how I'm going to be treated on a team, I'm going on solo missions after this." Dirge called out to the group and then ran after them, muttering to himself as he went. "Okay kids, let's get a move on," Dirge said, and Virgil slapped the back of his head as he left the room with his teammates laughing. Train 19, etc. Over the walkie-talkie that was in Naruto's ear, came Dirge said, "Come in Legion, this is Kamier from the roof, report in, over." Naruto looked at the red-marked box he was sitting on and waved a hand in front of his face to chase away the stench. "This is Legion, I'm fine in the back, but what the hell is up with this crate marked Shinra Labs? It smells like there's a corpse in it, over," he said. "Did you say Shinra Labs, Naruto?" "That's the shinobi from the front." From the front of the train, where the conductors were trying to keep the train rolling, Virgil remarked, frowning, over. He was wearing a black and blue mask for this assignment, with the blue lines creating 4 slitted eyes and what appeared to be a mask shape for his lower face. "This is Shadow from the passenger section. I'm so bored. Do you have any meaning for Shinra Labs, Virgil?" "Over," the dark-haired girl replied from her seat in the passenger section of the train. Since most ninja clans were based in Central and the few civilian-born ninjas had to find apartments, the train was largely empty since no one frequently left Central for West City. "Maybe," Virgil said, writing out the name, "but I need confirmation. Does it say SHINR Labs?" "Over." Dirge moaned. With a frustrated tone, Dirge told them, "Guys, put the crate away. It's nothing to get worked up about. Let's just get this thing to West so the NA team can take it to North, over." However, Naruto rolled his eyes and stared down at the crate. Virgil scowled from his position as Naruto smirked and said, "Hey you're right, the name matches Shinra. Now care to enlighten us about what is up with them, over?" Virgil responded to Naruto and Shadow, who both blinked. Naruto scowled and slipped off the crate. He squatted down and then searched for a way to look inside the crate. Shinra Labs are the ones that made the trains and such that tie Central City to the 4 cities surrounding it. They also came up with those Regan pills, and they are in a pretty large building over, Virgil said. The train ride was rather dull for Naruto, who could only sit back and wonder about the smell emanating from the damn crate when he slowly closed his eyes to visit his tenant. Dirge's voice said, be quiet, and Naruto, if you're trying to find a way to look in that box, don't waste your time, and if you're thinking about opening it you will be punished over, and Naruto growled before returning to sitting on the crate with his arms folded across his chest. Soon after meeting his grandfather and cousins, Naruto discovered that he had long been aware of Kyuubi's presence within him. He also discovered that Kyuubi had assisted Sparta in fending off Mundusa's attempt to take over the world. Because of their meditation training at the academy, Naruto visited the fox shortly after, which was, to put it mildly, interesting. The fox had initially threatened him, but Naruto had no real fear of the great beast because he was related to Virgil Sparta and was certain that his grandfather wouldn't be afraid of the fox at all, so he would stand against him as well. It wasn't until later that the fox appeared to notice the boy's demonic power, which wasn't really his. When he realized that the legendary Dark Knight was coming from the red head, the fox actually smiled at him and said that he was surprised to see a Hanyu after all these years because it was actually his container. The demon then began muttering something, but Naruto didn't pay any attention and would have left if the beast hadn't called back. The beast informed him that although he detested humans, Naruto was in fact partially demon in order to stand his presence. The great beast and Naruto were not friends by any means, and the demon's abundance of knowledge made it difficult for Naruto to like him anymore. However, they both eventually came to the realization that they would be stuck together for the better part of eternity. As a result, they came to a decision whereby Kyuubi would assist Naruto by providing him with demon power and chakra whenever he needed it while fighting demons, and Naruto would alter his mental landscape. "Hey, Kyuubi, you're in here," Naruto said. "I wonder if he's hanging around great-grandpa's home," thinking of the location where his grandfather had claimed Sparta had lived. Naruto shrugged and walked along the marble pathways of the world he had created, and even when the edge stopped, slabs of floating marble came to form a pathway at his feet. Naruto had been told some stories about what the demon world looked like, so he used those stories and some guesswork to create a fairly accurate recreation. According to Virgil and his family's stories, the demon world sky was bright white with a hole in it that had a huge eye that would stare at you as you moved while pulsing. There were pieces of buildings that Naruto had seen all over Akumogakure floating around, along with enormous statues of angels in some spots. Naruto grinned, adding some of the more minor details with Kyuubi's assistance. One of those details was the door at the back of the foot that this path led to, and the mirror that led to what Naruto liked to think of as the stairworld was located directly in front of the foot. "Man, maybe I shouldn't have made this place so damn big," Naruto thought to himself as he arrived at the mirror and leaped inside, his expression bored. He emerged into a world of stairs that twisted into impossible angles, some going sideways, upside down, and even more outrageous directions. Naruto sighed and proceeded to the mirror that led to the graveyard of the fallen, as Kyuubi used to call it. He jumped into the mirror and landed into an area that resembled a chessboard, blinked, and then frowned. "Forgot about this place last time me and Kyuubi used it was when I was bored during class," he thought to himself, recalling the time he and Kyuubi played as pieces in a giant chess game just for fun. Then Naruto ran and jumped into the next mirror, which he saw in a place with blood and broken angel statues covering the ground, some stone archways and signs scattered throughout the area, and a dark, evil-looking sky that made him sigh in frustration. Naruto turned around and then jumped into the mirror there, appearing in a room with mirrors surrounding him, and he saw that Kyuubi had been this way because the samsara was already in place. Well, that makes things easier for me, he thought to himself, and he jumped into the mirror again, appearing in a location that was similar to the first area, except that the last building had purple flesh-like muscles covering it. As the marble paths developed in front of him and he entered the door, Naruto asked himself, "What are you doing? I wonder, Kyuubi." The area beyond it was primarily a vast empty space with a pit in the middle, and blue water appeared to be flowing into it. Naruto sighed before jumping up and down into the pit and closing his eyes, falling into a new area he liked to call the home of Sparta, because he thought it was the most beautiful place in this strange world. This location was a large archway with water cascading into the space and creating a waterfall at one end. The sky was dark blue, and he could see that same eye looking down at him. The only wall in the area had ancient symbols along it, and some of the old marble pillars had fallen. Naruto enjoyed this place because it was a little more comfortable than the rest of his mind, even though he had done it to make it more difficult to find his memories from outside sources, such as the Uchiha clan. However, it was still a little difficult for him to get to this location, where his demonic half was still bound to the wall and somehow shrouded in shadows. Naruto muttered, "Hello, Legion," to his demon self, who remained silent. Naruto sighed, perplexed as to why the entity was still as quiet as the dead. As Kyuubi leaped from his perch above Naruto, he said, "Kid, he hasn't spoken a word since he first woke up, and I don't think he's gonna talk to you just because you say hello," glancing at the boy with his slanted red eyes and black fur surrounding his eyes that curved into his long ears, sharp fangs and claws. 9 long fox tails that appeared to be hands with claws, a black collar bearing the kanji seal, and a size comparable to a mature wolf. "Hey Q, what have you been doing around here?" with a raised eyebrow, Naruto asked, surveying the space, and Kyuubi stretched before yawning. "I forgot how completely boring the demon world actually is," Kyuubi said boredly, and Naruto rolled his eyes. "Fighting the imaginary demons in your head, it's the only thing I can do that's even halfway damaging around here," he said. "So why are you here?" After Kyuubi asked, Naruto held the Legion statue in his palm in front of Kyuubi. "Do you know what this is?" he inquired, and Kyuubi scowled to himself while glancing at the statue in a manner reminiscent of Shadow and with his tail drooping somewhat. After Kyuubi remarked, "It's a statue that summons the Guilt Legion, a number of lesser demons that obey the one who holds this statue. I hadn't seen it in a long time, so I thought it might have been broken or something," and Naruto scowled before making the statue vanish. "All right, so how can I use it?" he inquired, and Kyuubi scowled thoughtfully. Kyuubi said, "Yuki should work, it works on every other demonic relic I've ever seen. Why not that? Of course, when a human uses it, it requires souls, demon souls ironically, so you should be good with all the red demon souls you've collected," before moving to a fallen pillar and resting with his head on his paws while Naruto grinned. Naruto muttered, "You're getting lazy, Kyuubi," and the fox gave him a fierce look. "Be thankful I'm inside you. It grants you my soul's weapon form and its devil trigger automatically, and if I wasn't here to heal you before your powers woke up, you'd have died while in that wretched Konoha city," Kyuubi complained as Naruto sighed. Naruto shook his head and then walked over to the brink of this place and fell down into the abyss to wake up. "I haven't needed a devil trigger yet, but when I do I'll be sure to thank you," Naruto muttered as Kyuubi complained to him and closed his eyes, falling asleep. Returning to the train. After being knocked to the ground, Naruto opened his eyes and said, "What the heck just happened?" After pondering, he grabbed his radio and said, "Hey, Legion is calling Kamier." What the devil just happened? After asking, Naruto heard his cousin yelling obscenities for a few minutes. "Shit, Legion, where the hell have you been? Some damn bandits are attacking us here, and I'm trying to take down the ones trying to get in with Ebony and Ivory," Dirge said, pausing as Naruto heard multiple shots from the boy's gun and screams. "Yeah. Take that, you ugly bastards." Anyways, like I was saying, shinobis had a few come at him from the sides, shadows probably surrounded by now, and we think that a few are heading your way. Dirge clarified, then he heard someone at the door and scowling. He unsheathed Gilver and got to his feet just as the door opened, and the red-headed man grinned at the group of thugs with daggers, swords, clubs, and other weapons, but they weren't as well trained as a ninja. "Alright shitheads, show me what you got," Naruto said, flipping his sword in hand and lunging forward with a roar, kicking one of the men in the face and sending the other sprawling back into the previous car. He then spun on his heel and swiftly brought his sword down on another thug's, slashing his neck. He shivered as he killed the man but pushed it to the back of his mind as he ducked under a clawed bandit. The other bandit's bravado was clearly failing as he saw a few jumping off the train while Shadow and Virgil were racing towards him, and the sound of gunfire still coming from above indicated that Dirge was still dealing with the ones trying to get on from whatever mode of transit they were using. "Hey Naruto, you notice these guys are really lame, or is it just me?" Virgil disappeared and then reappeared behind Naruto, slashing the man next to Naruto as Shadow spun, flinging her kunai into one's back and drawing him to her as she grabbed his head with her legs and then twisted her body, snapping the man's neck with a sickening crunch. Shadow inquired since there were only 3 soldiers remaining and they all instantly gave up and dropped on their knees. Shadow pouted and then used more ninja wire to tie up the other bandits, who all moaned to themselves, while muttering, "That's no fun." Virgil frowned beneath his mask as he sheathed Luce and Umbra into their positions at his sides. As one whispered, "To think we trusted those freaks." The Genin team all blinked. "Who can be trusted?" Naruto asked as an explosion from the roof knocked the train cars they were in off the tracks and rolling over to the side. "What the hell was that?" Virgil grunted as he sat up and looked around, unsheathing Luce and Umbra again and frowning beneath his black mask as Naruto requested. "Looks like our bandit friends here were nothing but a little distraction for the real boarding party," Virgil muttered before noticing that one of the bandits had a Hittite tied around his arm and partially concealed under one of his sleeves. "Anin, but from where?" Virgil growled, pulled the bandit up, and glared at the boy through his mask, asking, "Who the hell are you?" The young man swallowed a little as he snarled. Wearing a black choker collar, black elbow pads with gray pads on them, a gray short-sleeved shirt with black fingerless gloves that had metal plates at the back, a pair of shinobi pants with a black band around his left thigh, and a pair of black combat boots with black metal shin guards with cuts on them, the young man appeared to be no older than Virgil himself. He had shaggy black hair, a scar over his right eye, and a scar over his right eye. "Will," the boy stammered, then lowered his eyes, his hair shadowing them, and a cruel smirk slowly twisting his lips. "And you're all going to die here," he said darkly as the roof was blown apart and the genin were scattered as Will fell to the ground and onto his ass with a grunt. "What took you all so long?" the boy asked as a number of dark figures emerged from the shadows and helped him up before ripping the ninja wire from his arms and wrists. "Much better," the young man said, then flipped back away from Gilver as Naruto tried to surprise him. "Ah, so you're not dead, good, it wouldn't be any fun if you were that easy to kill," Will said, then cracked his knuckles. "Take them," he said darkly, and the figures disappeared before reappeared around the three. When one of the entities said, "You should just give up now, children," Naruto snarled. "Who do you think is a child? So fast. How can anyone be fast enough that my eyes can't follow him?" Naruto asked himself as he tried to look at the features of these people, but all of them seemed transparent and blurry, save for the smirking Will. He shouted, swinging Gilver, but the being was gone, making Naruto's eyes widen in shock. Then a fist struck his face, sending the young Nin into the side of the train car, causing him to grunt in pain as he pushed himself up and looked at the figure angrily. "What in hell are you pursuing, and who in hell are you?" When the teenager grinned at the silver-haired young Nin, Virgil angrily demanded. Will smirked and said, "But just imagine our surprise finding the sons of Sparta, or rather, his grandsons, were guarding our target," which caused Virgil and Naruto to widen their eyes. Virgil then gritted his teeth and knelt down, holding Luce and Umbra backwards. "Simple really, we were hired to do a job, and we'll do that job, though it seems that Alicia went a little overboard when she knocked the train off the tracks," Will said, stretching his neck and muttering. "So, if you're just a regular ninja working, who is hiring you?" After Virgil asked, Will took his tonfa off his back and held them in his palm while pointing with his head at the hazy creatures that swiftly passed Naruto and Shadow. The two turned to halt them, but two of the figures blocked their way and finally stopped shimmering. The girl in front of Naruto had short dark pink hair, bandages covering her right eye, most of her face, and forehead, leaving only her lower face and left blood-colored eye visible. She wore long black gloves over her arms, a manacle on her left wrist, a blue GI top with wraps around her waist, skin-tight black pants with a kunai case on her left thigh, black tabi socks, and blue Zori-style sandals with metal shin guards. The strange-looking axe she was holding was made of blue steel, with a normal blade and a black handle. Shadow's predecessor was a young man with tan skin, chocolate-colored eyes, a tattoo of the number 02 on his face, long blonde hair, black shinobi pants with a kunai case on his right thigh, black combat boots, for spears on his back, and wrappings around his arms and stomach that exposed his chest. He also wore red gloves with manacles around each wrist and no fingers. "Sorry kids, but if we told you who we worked for, we'd have to be serious about killing you, and it's no fun killing someone as interesting as the Sons of Sparta," Will said, shrugging and placing one of his tonfa on his shoulders with a smirk on his lips. "Callie, Taro, take care of those two for me while I deal with Sword Boy here," Will said to the two with him. Callie gave a big smile before nodding her head. Then, Will flipped backwards into the last car they had knocked off the train, Virgil following so they'd have more room. "All right. I think that seems like a plan," the young Nin rolled aside as the girl screamed and whirled her axe in the air before slamming it towards Naruto. Callie's axe struck the ground and used her strength to make a huge crater. Naruto then swung his Gilver at the woman who had leaned her head back, severing the bandages from her face. "Hey Taro-kun, you were right, I don't need those," Callie replied, exposing a perfectly functional eye beneath the bandages. Taro shook his head, and Naruto arched a brow as he gave the woman a little concerned glance. "You realize you're crazy, don't you?" Naruto questioned the female, who blinked and gave him a pouty look. "All of my psychiatrists agree with that, but what exactly is the point of being sane anyway? I mean, why should I care?" Naruto lunged at her after she asked herself, "It's not like sanity does anything for me," and then appeared to lose consciousness for a while. The girl smiled as he did so and leaned back before kicking Naruto in the side of the head and into the side of the train. "Oh, you want to play? Okay, then bring it," the girl yelled as she began to swing her axe at Naruto, who was flinching and avoiding the wild woman's blows. Taro, the youngster, sighed, took two of his spears off his back, twirled them around, and swung them at Shadow, who flinched back. "How do you feel about her?" Shadow inquired, and Taro turned to see Callie laughing hysterically as she swung her axe at Naruto, who was still avoiding the crazy pink-haired freak. He then leaped over a swing, and Callie's axe was abruptly lodged in the side of the train and appeared to be stuck as she tried to remove it. With a frustrated expression on her face, Taro, Naruto, and Shadow all started to perspire at the woman's antics. When the boy stated, "Honestly, I don't stand her, I just work with her," he twirled his spears, attached the ends of his two current spears to his back, and swung them at Shadow, who flipped backwards before reaching inside her vest and removing her hand from scythe. After Shadow told him, "Well, I can't imagine why you'd want to work with her," Taro nodded his head and flipped, swinging his spears at the girl, who blocked one with her hand scythe and then threw a kunai at the boy with her free hand. Taro kicked the linked spear and sent it at Shadow, who rolled away and ducked as he landed, then swung the spears at her again. While Will and Virgil were staring at each other, Virgil couldn't shake the feeling that he recognized this child from somewhere. "You're incredibly stiff, you know that, right?" With a sneer on his lips and Tomfa over his shoulder, Will inquired. This coming from someone who works with a pink-haired madwoman isn't saying much. Will shrugged his shoulders and Virgil frowned in response as he knelt down and stared at the other teenager. "Point taken," he said before crouching down and lunging at Virgil, spinning his tonfa as Virgil blocked the attack and tried to counter it. Will smirked and flipped the tonfa in his hands, knocking down Virgil's blades before slamming it into the side of his head. Virgil staggered back from the attack, his head throbbing, and Will winced. "Ow, that's got to hurt something fierce. Need an aspirin?" Will muttered, then asked with a smile, and Virgil snarled and lunged at the youngster who was swinging his swords rapidly. He felt his eyes widen as the boy somehow caught up to him in speed, which was an accomplishment in and of itself. "You're quite the nuisance," Virgil said as he glared at Will through his mask heatedly. The other teen simply smirked wider and gestured for the other teen to approach him. Virgil smirked as he swung his wakizashi at the boy, then crouching and spinning into a sweeping kick, but Will jumped over it. Virgil then swung his wakizashi at the boy, but he blocked it with his tonfa, then kicked Virgil in the face, landing in a crouch, still grinning. "With dirge, etc." "At least it was only the last two cars," the silver-haired N.A. mumbled to himself as he sat up and grimaced as he looked at the train that was now on its side. He got up to see someone sitting on the train cars, staring down at him with a big object dangling across her lower back. "So, who started this party exactly, babe?" Dirge asked, holstered ebony and ivory, grabbed Rebellion, and aimed the blade at the still silent woman before falling to the ground with a loud thud. Dirge didn't get a good look at the girl until his eyes widened and he forced himself to suppress his usual perverted thoughts. She was of average height, with fair skin and forest green eyes, with a mole below her left eye. Her long, dark green, almost black hair had a strand on the left side that was closed by a gold clip. She wore a black leather top with lace embroidery on the back, exposing a good deal of cleavage, and black leather sleeves on her arms and hands that were laced like gloves. She wore a black leather belt in the shape of a Y over a miniskirt that covered only the back and sides of her legs, leaving the front uncovered. She wore a pair of lace stockings and high-heeled boots, and a huge silver weapon of some kind in one hand. "Damn, darling, are you going to war?" Dirge asked, glancing at the woman who scowled a little because he was focusing his attention on something other than her face. She then raised her weapon, and Dirge blinked as she pulled the trigger, causing the boy to yell as he dodged a barrage of bullets from her weapon, which was spitting out bullets like a machine gun. The woman stopped when he ducked behind a rock, and then used an unidentified power to raise the rock. "Wow, babe, you really know some nice tricks," Dirge said, rolling out of the way as the rock returned to the ground and the girl flipped her gun, turning it into a new weapon. It was now larger and bulkier, and after a few seconds of open admiration, Dirge let out a loud curse as it began to shoot out bullets that were tearing through rocks like tissue. Dirge then ducked behind a large rock, sat down, and looked at Rebellion before turning around and seeing the girl change her weapon again, making it appear sleeker than before. Dirge barely had time to blink before the woman fired the weapon, and he had to duck back behind the rock as shotgun fire almost took his head off. Dirge then lunged out from behind the rock and rained a hail of his own gunfire down on the woman, knocking her to the ground. "My God, I think I'm in love," Dirge said with a silly smile, and the woman rolled her eyes and ran toward him before hitting him with her large silver weapon. Dirge grunted as he was pushed back, then holstered his guns and brought out Rebellion, swinging the blade down at the girl, which she caught with her strange silver weapon. "Man, babe, you're one tough bitch," Dirge said matter-of-factly, and the woman scowled before kicking him in the stomach, changing her weapon back to its original form, and showering the young Sparta with bullets. After that, the lady twisted and grunted in agony as the backs of her legs were slit from behind. She turned to see Dirge getting up the same way she had. The woman gave him an odd look before getting up and staring at each other. "Got a name, babe?" The woman cocked her head to one side when Dirge inquired. "You, Alicia?" she inquired, and Dirge smiled. Dirge flipped Rebellion and kneeling down slowly, saying, "Dirge Sparta, babe, now then, show me what you got," after which Alicia and Dirge both lunged at each other and swung their weapons at each other. Returning inside, now in the cargo room, the two surviving Nin who had passed the ninja searched around before spotting the crate marked Shinra Labs. The first one nodded and started drawing seals on the crate, and the second one quickly formed hand seals. Before long, the first one finished and retreated, and the second one finished as well, and the crate disappeared into thin air. The two looked at each other and nodded while holding a device to their ears. The second Nin said, "Mission accomplished," and he lowered the device, and the two Nin disappeared into thin air. With Naruto, etc. All Naruto needed to know about Kali was that she was insane and incredibly strong. Therefore, when she stopped cutting Naruto's head in two, it was too late for him. "Hey, Taro-kun, looks like the twins finished," she said, her face pouting, and Taro halted his own attack. Will smirked before lunging towards Virgil and flipping over him, their eyes briefly locking as he landed behind Virgil and then flipping until he was beneath the hole that had been made in the train, now the roof. With that, Will, Kali, and Taro all shimmered out of existence like the rest of this odd gang. "Well then, it was nice meeting you kids, hope to see you again in the future for a rematch that isn't interrupted, Sons of Sparta," they said. "Could someone maybe explain what the hell just transpired?" Naruto inquired, and Dirge finally appeared, looking past irritated. Dirge snarled and then said in a pathetic tone, "A plain surgical strike, that's what, and the hottest, toughest, downright badass girl I've ever met just vanished before I could even find out where she lives," as he approached Naruto and assisted his cousin in getting up. "Is anyone hurt?" Dirge inquired, and Virgil let out a sigh. The silver-haired lad muttered, "Nothing more than my pride," and then turned to face the others. "Let's find out what their target was," said Virgil, and the others agreed. Dirge then turned to face Shadow and the bandits that the odd Neen had left behind. As Dirge said to his brother and cousin, "You handle them, I've gotta make sure of what those freaks' target was." Shadow smiled and said something about displaced aggression, cracking her knuckles menacingly. "Come on," Dirge said to them as they got into the other car and looked around. Naruto saw right away that the Shinra crate was gone. Naruto remarked, "They took the Shinra crate," and Dirge moaned. He groaned, "I was afraid of that," and Virgil sighed as he glanced around. His words, "Father's going to kill us for this," caused Dirge to glare irritably at him. "I'm the Nero Angelo here, and you'll get fined, while I get a hell chewed out of my ass and, worse, my commander will also get it. This was also my first blasted mission, no less," he yelled and began pounding his head against the closest crate while Naruto glanced around before thinking, "Hold on a second. How did they find out that container was on this train? Why was it placed on a civilian train?" Virgil put a palm on Naruto's chin as he asked. Virgil said, "Clearly Naruto, there's more to this than meets the eye. Dirge, we'd better figure out the best way home and take those bandits with us for interrogation. I'm sure Vulcan will have fun with them." And Dirge stopped banging his head and nodded before he walked back out into the civilian car. Before Naruto could follow him, Virgil grabbed him by the arm and held him back. "Naruto, that will character. I got a decent look at his Hittite," he said, and Naruto looked at his cousin with a raised brow. "It belonged to Konohagakure," he said, and Naruto's eyes widened. When their employer approached them, Will and the rest of his team appeared in a dark room with the twins sitting on a crate and then leaping into the shadows. "So did you," the man started, but stopped when he saw the crate and smiled. "I hope it wasn't much trouble," the man said, and Will put his tonfa on his back before bending back slightly. The man cleared his throat and turned away when Will remarked, "A little, you didn't mention a team would be there, old man. It's not good business to withhold useful information like that." Will chuckled and then took the Konoha Hittite from his arm and held it in the light with a smirk. "I had no idea they would be there. We had hoped that by shipping it with a civilian train that you wouldn't encounter any Neen at all. Now we have to worry about them catching on to us or just getting snoopy," the man muttered. The teen said, "Not likely, old man. I wore this just in case there were Neen there, so it would throw them off our trail. There's going to be a bit of strain between Konoha and Akuma now, but it's not like we care." And as Will dropped the Hittite to the ground and stepped on it, Callie began nodding her head in a crazy smile. "After all, we have more fun when there is a conflict." Will smacked his face as she joyfully yelled, "Callie, when we get home take your damn medicine," Will complained, and Callie stuck her tongue out at him. Alicia slapped Callie's head, causing the girl to yell at him, and Taro muttered something about not starting her so early. The twins were silent but appeared amused. When he cleared his throat, Will sighed and leaned back again, bringing the group back to their employer's presence. The man continued, "Now then, the fee you wanted," and threw a briefcase to the group. "With a little extra for all your troubles," he added, and Callie smiled and gave the briefcase a hug while muttering money swiftly and sing-song style. "Nice. It's been a pleasure working with you. However, I have a question. Could you please respond?" Will asked. "Why would you have us steal your own crate?" As the man nodded and two men approached the crate the gang had taken and began to carry it away, the Shinra president grinned as Will asked, rubbing his head. With a sly smile, the man said, "Simple really. I can't allow anyone to learn what's inside of it, and I heard rumors that the infamous Knight of Hell could do any job no matter how taught, and the 6 warriors all shrugged before making their way to the door, Kali continuing to chant absurd things about money as they went. The Shinra president then turned and entered his company, grinning. It was quite simple to control bounty hunters. Onigage Tower, Akumagakur, etc. With Dirge standing next to them and muttering that hot-ass bitches are worse than an army of demons, Naruto's team stood in front of the Onigage. Naruto stood between Shadow and Virgil, who had his arms crossed and a frown on his face, and Shadow, who appeared to prefer to be somewhere else right now. "All right, what happened?" Virgil was the first to speak after the Onigage asked, looking at them with his fingers interlaced. "We were attacked by a group of ninja, which I believe to either be from Konoha or in some way affiliated with them." The leader of the group had a hidden Konohagakure Hitayate around his left arm. The group consisted of 6 members. Each had an ability to vanish from the visible spectrum. Although the leader didn't use this ability, I believe he had it also. The group attacked in order to gain access to a crate that was on board the train at the time. It was Shinra cargo, the child clarified, and the Onigage touched the bridge with his nose as Shadow examined her feet. "Dad, Onigage-sama, are we having problems?" The Onigage smiled gently at her question. No, you all did your best given the situation. You made sure no civilian casualties were sustained. Although the train cars that were detached do have to be repaired, it's nothing we can't afford." Shinra, however, was in the wrong by not telling us of this cargo of theirs. And at the moment a few of the council are trying to intimidate the Shinra group into telling us what they felt they had to put on a civilian train as we speak, he stated, and then sighed. "As for the ability you mentioned, Virgil, exactly what did it look like when you couldn't see them?" he asked, and Virgil looked at him. As he tried to explain, they were almost like shadows existing in the visible spectrum but blurred, and when they moved it was almost like looking at something with an after image, not stable, completely, as they moved faster than light itself when they used the ability. And then when they stopped using the ability it was almost like the shadows pulled off of them and they no longer blurred, Virgil said with a scowl and a moment to consider. "It's called the Shadow Cloak. It's an ability my clan learns when they reach master level, however not many can use it otherwise." Shadow looked at him. "They belong to our clan, right?" The Onigage shook his head in response to her demand. "What about the leader? If the others weren't, although unlikely, it is possible that he might have been from our clan. What did he look like exactly? I might know of him if he was banished from the clan," he asked with a scowl. "His name was Will," Virgil continued, and the Onigage scowled. "He was about my height, if not taller, with black hair, one blue and one red eye with a scar over the blue eye, and pale skin. Although similar to us, he's definitely not from our clan. Those eyes are from an old order of priests indignant to Konoha and Fire Country, however, but they were supposed to have vanished centuries ago," Virgil replied as his eyes widened. Virgil frowned and asked himself, "Then he is from Konoha. What are they up to?" The Onigage sighed and reclined in his chair. "I don't know what they're up to, however I believe that you should all head to their Chunin exams. It's in a month's time, which could allow us some intel on their forces. We haven't been in contact with them for a good deal of time after all. Also, Virgil sent me a request to have your team head to Nami no Kuni, the Onigage replied, and Naruto looked up. The boy asked, "What, Grandpa? Virgil wants us." "What for?" and the Onigage laughed quietly to himself. The Onigage said, "Naruto, he wants you to help him free Nami no Kuni from the businessman Gato," and Naruto stared in amazement. "What the hell is going on down there?" Naruto asked, and the Onigage nodded his head. "Wait, Gato, as in Gato shipping? The richest man in the world?" The Onigage scowled. "We're not entirely sure, but according to Virgil's report it seems that not only has Gato taken over the country, but he's making sure he's feared by killing all who oppose him. He has hired bandits, mercenaries, and missing Nin to ensure that no one opposes him. Also, it seems he's been attempting to keep them from making a bridge to the mainland so the village could prosper, Abel stated to them, and Naruto sighed. He said, "So when do we leave?" And the Onigage turned to face Dirge. Naruto raised a hand and the Onigage said, "Dirge, I'm afraid, won't be going anywhere as of yet. He has to remain here and begin his training for the Nero Angelo Corps," before silently stroking his chin. "Also, it could be a while before the techs in South City get the gate ready to send you all to Wave," the man said, and Naruto replied, "Yes, Naruto?" He asked, "What is the gate?" and the Onigage laughed. "Sorry, I forgot you've never been through the gate before," he said mostly to himself as he looked at the boy. "The gate is a combination of seals, chakra manipulation, and the newest available technology. It was developed as a means for our shinobi to get in and out of other countries quickly, but is also viable for full-scale invasions on our own part," Abel said, then leaned back. "The gate works by having over a dozen seals on it, and is like a much larger version of the Yondaime Hokage's Hiraishin no Jutsu, as it can transport a person almost instantaneously to another area. However, this device needs an enormous amount of chakra to be used, and as such, it's lucky that you and Virgil have such large chakra stores. If you didn't, it would take nearly a month to store the power needed in the energy grid." The Onigage finished and Naruto and Virgil nodded to the man. "Also, Virgil sent a note about that Legion thing of yours. He says you need to look up a Dark Legionnaire in a book called The Forbidden Apocrypha of Azark." The Onigage informed and then smirked. "You will all be contacted when the gate is ready, so until then, dismissed," and with that the four gave a quick salute and left the Onigage to his work. "So it's in that stupid Apocrypha thing," Naruto remarked as they descended a staircase from the Onigage headquarters. Shadow used air quotes to ask, "What do you mean by stupid Apocrypha thing?" Naruto crossed his arms. "I mean, that thing is where Grandpa gave me my lessons in Kenjutsu from. He said he uses the Dark Slayer style like V here, but he wants me to use the Chaos Knight style. Apparently it had a few varying tricks that his Dark Slayer or Dirge's Trickster styles didn't, which he believed would be more useful to me. Not sure why he thought that though," Virgil replied with a shrug. "Think of it this way, he wanted you to move forward under your own power, not copy his or my strengths. He wants you to become known for your own skill, your own sword, your own power," Virgil remarked with a sage tone, and Shadow, "Oh come on you two, don't be such stick in the mud. Let's go find that book so Naruto-chan can use that Legion thing and we can go see Virgil," she said, smiling as she saw Naruto glare at her for calling him Naruto-chan. The girl yelled as she left, and both Virgil and Naruto complained that she was bothersome with her nicknames. Virgil's Castle, etc. In his youth, Naruto had never fully appreciated the true ancient beauty of his grandfather's home, which was located just north of the main village and past the ruins of a long-forgotten city that lay beyond an ancient forest teeming with demons and other such creatures. At first, it was just a castle, something that was expected to be massive and made for multiple people to live in, nothing out of the ordinary for someone of the lineage that Virgil was constantly reminding him of. However, as he grew older, he was able to appreciate it, as it was the only Western-style castle to have survived 200 years of war and death, while the people of the surrounding world would gradually fade and then be reborn. The castle was large, at least 15 stories tall, with over 100 rooms, if not more, and it was of an ancient lost Western design. It was made of an unidentified mineral, possibly from the demon world because it was too sturdy to have survived as long as it had. Many of the walls inside the castle were still covered in ancient blood, and the exterior was covered in numerous towers, with ancient paths connecting them and massive spikes covering them. The walls were etched with symbols, ancient and forgotten glyphs that only those from the past could recognize, and the building was completely covered by archways and columns lining the sides, with a single, massive tower rising from the very center of the castle and high into the skies above. The castle's ancient walls were partially destroyed by time and war, but they also appeared to have contained ancient demons that were loyal to Sparta and still protected it from intruders. There was a garden outside the castle with stone steps and paths leading to the entrance, and both Naruto and Virgil took care of the plants every day. For Naruto, caring for plants was a hobby, and for Virgil, it was a way to unwind and spend time with his grandson outside of training. Virgil had once claimed that Sparta's followers had built the castle for him when he once ruled over humanity and protected them. For some reason, Naruto didn't doubt his grandfather. He also claimed that his mother, Eva, had planted the garden long ago, before his family moved, at the very least. The interior of the castle was a sight to behold, as it retained its ancient beauty despite the addition of modern conveniences like electricity, primarily for comfort. The floors were made of fine marble and had a rounded appearance, with some rooms having hardwood floors and others even having rugs. One room in particular was enormous, round, and had stained glass windows running the length of the room, large columns between many of them, and two stone bridges between a circular altar and a strange, almost statue-like object with a door on either side. The library in this room was the largest in the world, with well over 500,000 books alone, shelves lining every wall and more in the middle, and stairs leading up onto high floors where even more books were kept, some of which were from before the shinobi world began. When he was younger, Naruto frequently got lost because the place was so big that he literally needed a map to find everything. Virgil and Dirge also thought this and made copies of the Redhead's map so they wouldn't get lost when they visited their uncle or cousin. Shadow had only been there 3 times before, and each time she only went into the study, the library, or Naruto's room to see the boy while Virgil and her father would talk about the village. At the moment, the 3 were in the library, with Naruto searching for the ancient, allegedly forbidden apocrypha of Izark, the same tome from which he had learned his kenjutsu technique all those long years ago. So, did anyone find it? Shadow was searching for what Naruto had previously described to them, an ancient, filthy brown book with belts holding it closed and a strange-looking symbol on the front and sides. Naruto asked as he closed and put yet another book back in its proper place, and Virgil hummed, saying no in his own way as he put a red book back as well, leaving his eyes exposed. While Virgil and Naruto moaned, Shadow complained, "I've seen over a dozen ancient brownish red books but none of them have any unusual emblem on the front or sides." Virgil said, "We've been browsing the shelves, Naruto, but maybe Uncle put it somewhere else, maybe even in a case or in his study," but Naruto shook his head no. "Hey, it's not the seal's fault you tried to get in before I or Grandpa knew you," Naruto said with a shrug and a smirk, causing Shadow to complain again and continue to walk around. "Grandpa doesn't like keeping that book in his study because he has so many guests meet him there. He has it in here because of the seals that keep people out," Naruto said. "Uncle sure does like to hide things," Virgil murmured, then Naruto snapped his fingers as an understanding hit his face. Virgil rolled his eyes and moved into the cases that held all of Virgil's rarer and more valuable books, but the Apocrypha was nowhere to be found either. Where else would he hide it, of course? Naruto exclaimed, then placed a finger on a row of books before stopping at a black-bound book and pulling it, a mechanical sound coming from it as then another shelf of books slid out of the way to show a room filled with what looked like weapons, most of which having been salvaged from the Devil May Cry shop after Virgil had found it wrecked. Shadow asked out loud, "What do you know?" and then smiled. "What other little secret passages are in this place?" Naruto arched a brow, which caused Virgil to laugh. He merely continued to smirk as he remarked, "She's wondering if the mirrors in the bathrooms are one-sided," and Naruto blushed and gave her an odd look. "What on earth would make you want to know?" he asked, and Shadow shot him a sly glance. "No explanation, but why are there so many weapons?" She then requested that the topic be changed, and Naruto agreed, while not particularly enjoying it. When Naruto saw the old leather book on a stand, he said, "They're devil arms Grandpa has been storing for years, and that damn book." Virgil entered the room and touched the hilt of a laster, one of his father's old swords, but he did not hold it. He muttered gently, "My father once used this sword," and then turned to face Agni and Rudra, two more of his father's swords, followed by Cerberus, Ifrit, Nevin, and all the other devil arms that his family had accumulated over the years and were now stored in a single chamber. "Who is the one ahead of us?" The blades were serrated, with glowing orbs in them coming to life, and now guard on the hilt with a golden piece at each end that held a small head in place that had glowing eyes and a mouth. One blade was red and orange, the other green and blue. As Virgil turned to look at Agni and Rudra, Shadow looked around in confusion and Naruto moaned. Agni moaned gently, "Brother, why must you yell?" "I was dreaming about our adventures with Master Dante." Rudra blinked and then turned to face his brother apologetically. The green sword murmured, "I'm sorry, brother, but it looks like we have visitors in our house again." Shadow stared at the blades, as Virgil shook his head and Naruto snickered at her expression. Naruto snorted and muttered that he had locked them up because they were too darn obnoxious when Agni cried, "Really, guests? It has been so long I had feared that Master Virgil had forgotten about us." The more intelligent of the two swords asked, "I know, brother, it has been far too long, boy, tell me who you are. You bear a resemblance to Master Virgil, but your soul and stance shows you to be a much different man," to which Virgil responded with a quiet laugh. He said, "I am Virgil, with an I, son of Dante," and Rudra gave a small laugh. Rudra exclaimed, "Brother, he is Master Dante's son," to an apparently smiling Agni. When Agni asked, Virgil's eyes softened as he gazed at the two swords. "I know, brother, it's amazing, the likeness with Master Virgil is astounding. Tell us, boy, where is Master Dante?" Virgil said, "He was taken by demons a long time ago," and the two swords exchanged glances before nodding. Agni nodded its hilt-like head in accord as Rudra stated, "We are sorry. We have never lost our father or our mother, though we have not seen them in over 1,000 years." Naruto abruptly responded, Right, we just came to get that book, you guys," and both swords appeared to blink. Agni asked, "Brother, isn't that little Naruto?" and Rudra muttered to himself. His words, "Why yes, I do believe it is brother," caused Naruto to slap his face. He then hurried into the room, took the book, and dragged Virgil out the door as the two swords began discussing how large he had grown. After leaving the room, Naruto went to a table, set the book down, and raised a chair so he could read Shadow sitting next to Virgil. She asked, "So what's the story with the talking swords?" and Virgil laughed. As Naruto perused the book's table of contents and paused at Chaos Legion, he swiftly turned to the page and raised an eyebrow. "They're actually devil arms. The souls of certain demons can be used to create weapons, though I don't exactly know what the requirements for this are. It has been years since any demon became a devil arm after all," Virgil explained. Virgil shrugged, unsure of what it meant, but he thought the Chaos Legion might be the guilt thing he inherited from his uncle Virgil. It is the darkest glyph thou bearest, it sacrifices stray souls to summon unearthly force shall obey and serve thee, 'tis named, Chaos Legion, Naruto read. Then Shadow said, "What the hell is that?" and the two boys gave a little laugh. Naruto told the girl, "It's the beginning part of the chapter over, Chaos Legion, that's all I know," before scowling. She asked, "So what the hell is a Chaos Legion?" and Naruto, wearing a gentle frown, picked up the book and continued reading. Shadow made an O with her mouth, but she didn't fully understand Naruto's statement that it's a monster, one that obeys a Knight of the Dark Glyphs, whom bears the darkest glyph in order to summon the beings known only as Chaos Legion. They were apparently very few of them in ancient times, only one in any given age, though usually it was a title passed from father to son. Shadow's expression froze in dislike as Virgil summarized, basically, it's a person who uses the lost souls who still wander this world in order to command a monster to do his or her bidding. Virgil crossed his arms and frowned as Naruto remarked, "Not exactly our style, using souls, at least maybe demon souls, but this seems like it's for human souls from the way you talking." Naruto continued to frown as Virgil said, "Perhaps, but I would say that a demon's soul would be far more effective with them. Although the demons would never be reborn, it just means less for us to actually hunt," before taking the statue out of his weapons pouch and placing it next to the book. Naruto said, "I understand that V, but I'd like to know how I use this fucking thing," and Virgil nodded. Naruto rolled his eyes and shoved the book to Virgil, who took it and began reading it to himself. "Let me see it. I'm more versed in spells and rituals than Dirge or yourself after all," Virgil muttered. Virgil cleared his throat, but Shadow shrugged and said, "Neeson is weird when he starts this kind of stuff. Whenever he starts something he always has to finish it, you notice that?" Naruto nodded his own head in agreement. "So what you wanna do?" she asked. Virgil grabbed the Legion statue and the Apocrypha and said, "It seems that we have to go to the altar room, only there will we be able to grant you the darkest glyph of the Knight of the Dark Glyphs." Naruto and Shadow sighed and followed him, leaving the door to the room with the devil arms open. Rudra nodded his hilt in agreement with Agni's statement, "Brother, it appears that our guests have left us."